Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California is one of Six Flags' most notable parks, and to me, it is ultimately their crown jewel. After taking my first visit to this park in March of 2024, I'm prepared to give a thorough, in-depth look at Six Flags Magic Mountain, because this is a really interesting park. This park originally opened in 1971 with just 2 roller coasters, but since then, many more have been added. In the park's history, they've added 28 roller coasters, and 20 still remain to this day. Until Energylandia eventually passes them, they have the most coasters in the world with those 20. And I'd be surprised if you really knew this park for anything but the coasters. That is what they're known for, and they market themselves as the thrill capital of the world. This park has a terrific skyline, and if you're driving from Northern California, it's really the first thing in Southern California that you see. And overall, the park has a very good location. The freeway access is very easy, and there's plenty of restaurants and hotels near the park as well. If you're thinking about tacking it on to a Southern California road trip, it's going to be about an hour and a half to 2.5 hours away from those SoCal parks. Location is really an underrated part of a theme park. It's nice that you don't have to drive through some sort of rural area for a couple hours to get here. It's much easier than that. Okay, let's talk about getting into this park. If you want to get just one day ticket, it'll cost you at least $79. Depending on the day and season, it could easily be more than that, especially if you don't buy it online. To me, a season pass is the obvious choice, especially because as of this recording, the Gold Pass, which just gets you access to Six Flags Magic Mountain, is the same price, $79. We'll touch on this more later, but I suspect you might want more than one day. If you want to upgrade from that, you can get a Platinum Pass, which will run you $115. This will get you access for the entire season to Magic Mountain and Hurricane Harbor, plus you'll get 15% off food and merch and 1 skip the line ticket. If you want to get access to all the Six Flags parks, then the Diamond Pass is your bet. Typically, if there aren't any sales going on, this will run you $195, but there's a lot of perks that come with it. You'll get 20% off food and merch instead of 15, 4 skip the line tickets, more on that in a minute, preferred parking, the VIP entrance, and your season drink cup. A few notes though. 1. Preferred parking is a major time saver, especially if you don't get there early. It could take you 20 to 25 minutes to walk from the front entrance to the back of the parking lot. Number 2. Those skip the line tickets do not work on X2, Wonder Woman, or Crazianity. And finally, number 3, the VIP entrance is a side entrance at the front gate where you can get in before the crowds arrive. So this is actually really helpful. You get to bypass that line for the morning. I think with all the attractions here, 2 days at least is a wise option. And so getting a season pass, even if it's just the lowest tier, seems to make a lot of sense. Also, a note on those skip the line passes. Those can only be used at your home park. After activating them day of at the Flash Pass building at the front of the park, you can reserve what ride you want to ride, and it will show you a return time. These return times mean that you can't return to that attraction until that time, but once that time hits, you have the rest of the day to do it. Again, no X2, Crazianity, or Wonder Woman. And while on the note of season passes, one final thing of interest. You must activate your season pass at your home park if you're doing the Diamond Pass. This makes complete sense, but take our situation. We were originally thinking about buying it from Six Flags Discovery Kingdom because that's our local Six Flags park, and that is truly our home park. But because we weren't planning on visiting that Vallejo park before our Magic Mountain visit, that would have caused major problems. So in order to activate your season pass, you must do it at your home park. That's the bottom line. The arrival experience at this park definitely varies depending on when you get there and if you have preferred parking. If you get there early enough, then it shouldn't be that long of a walk, but I tell you one thing, it can be an absolute hike from the very back of the parking lot to the front entrance, as I alluded to earlier. And when you're walking back at night, there really isn't much lighting out there, so it feels kind of weird. Preferred parking here is definitely a winner, but seeing all the coasters and the skyline and seeing them cycle really does get you excited for your day. Once you go through security, you can go right for the water park, Hurricane Harbor, or left for the amusement park. This review will only cover the amusement park. Once you get inside the main gate for Six Flags Magic Mountain, you have a nice little Main Street area that opens up with a great view of Revolution and Tatsu at the front of the park with some water fountains. It looks really great. The park layout may be a little confusing to a first-time visitor. The right side of the park is pretty straightforward, as that's the newer section and there's fewer trees hiding the footpaths, but the left side is a little more convoluted. Going that way, if you walk behind the New Revolution, you can continue down that direction and eventually you run into X2 or Viper, or you can continue to the right around the backside of the hill while you eventually run into the Rapids Ride and Tatsu. Then, once you reach the next fork, you can head right to Samurai Summit or left, which will take you to the underground and eventually the right side of the park. This is a big park to navigate, and it takes time to get from one side to the other. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, there's just a lot to do here and a lot to see. So how should you experience these attractions? As I always say, I recommend arriving at least 30 minutes before park opening time. If you don't have the VIP entrance, maybe 45 minutes. And as I always try to give, here are a couple ideas of touring plans that you can do once you enter the park. It slightly depends on your interests. Here's number 1. You head to the back of the park and start with West Coast Racers and Apocalypse in the underground. When we did this, it was literally us, one employee, and a few other guests back there. That was it. From here, you head back into DC Universe, hitting the coasters along the way, and then you have a branch off. You can either go to Twisted Colossus and Scream, or you can go up the hill to Ninja and Superman Escape from Krypton. And actually, while on the note, let's talk about Samurai Summit for a moment. This area definitely needs a refresh, and getting up there is an absolute pain. This hill is somewhat long, but very, very steep. Not exactly stroller or wheelchair friendly. I would consider myself a pretty fit person, but even this was kind of a lot for me. It's very steep up there. Just a warning. That's the first touring plan I propose. By the end of it, you will run into lines at this point. Now, for touring plan B, you start with Full Throttle and then Goliath, before moving on to the Scream Punk District and Twisted Colossus and Scream. From here, you make your way back through DC Universe. I think the first one has the potential to be more effective on a busy day because of the fact that you're going to the back of the park first. Now, the one thing that neither of these plans answer is this question: how do you deal with X2? Assuming you don't make the expensive splurge for the full Flash Pass, I think the best option here is just to wait it out in the afternoon. It'll be long and it may go down, but that's probably your best bet. With all of that being said though, I think it's a good time to get into this park's ride lineup. Because, I mean, come on, that's why you come to Six Flags Magic Mountain. Starting with the roller coasters, Twisted Colossus is the best in my opinion. This RMC dueling hybrid has almost 5,000 feet of track and has 2 very well done sides. There's so much airtime here. The first drop is great in the back, and that first big hill is another tremendous moment. Plus, both inversions are very well done, especially the Top Gun stall. Now, unfortunately, you aren't guaranteed to duel on every single cycle, but even when you don't, it's still a really great ride. Dueling, though, does make it a more magical experience. Overall, Twisted Colossus is fantastic. The park's other RMC and newest coaster, Wonder Woman Flight of Courage, is also quite good. This is the quote next generation Raptor from Rocky Mountain Construction, and while it doesn't have all the same strength as the originals, it's still a great coaster. There's a few great moments of airtime. The first drop in the back and that camelback hill provide great moments of air, and then also you have those awesome inversions thrown in. It doesn't fly through its course like the original Raptors do, but I think the length is a major selling point, and I overall really enjoyed it. And I was lucky to get a ride on it too, because it was having a bunch of technical issues during my visit. I'm not sure if this is a normal thing or not, but it's something I should note. This ride also is one of the worst locker systems I've ever seen. It's very awkward and doesn't make any sense whatsoever the way they placed it, so I guess keep that in mind too, but it doesn't take away from the ride experience once you get on it. X2 though is this park's most unique coaster by far. Unfortunately, I was only able to get one ride on it, but it was certainly a memorable one. This was the world's first 4th dimension roller coaster, and it was built by Aerodynamics in 2001. This seems to be the park's most popular ride, and as I said earlier, it's often paired with downtime, so count yourself lucky if you can ride it, but it is a tremendous experience. Flipping throughout a layout like that is just crazy. It's really a bummer that after this ride, Aerodynamics went out of business, because if this was any indication to where the company was willing to go, we could have seen some awesome aero coasters. Goliath is big, but not the most forceful. There's a little pop of air on the first drop, and the helix in the second half of the ride is very intense, an instant gray out moment for me every time. But otherwise, it's not the most forceful coaster. That being said, I still enjoyed this Giovanella Hyper. It's got some good speed at the beginning, and it's a very smooth coaster too. That's one thing that even if you don't really enjoy it, you can credit it. It's smooth. And overall, I think it's worth a ride, even if it doesn't stack up to the B&M Hypers. For wooden coasters, there's only one representative, but it's a good one in Apocalypse. This coaster starts with a pretty well-themed queue line, especially for Six Flags standards, and then the GCI coaster is pretty solid. It probably won't be anyone's number one at Magic Mountain, but it's a very solid coaster. I actually think it's better in the front row, and there's some good pops of air in the first half of the ride. The ride does admittedly die out, and that last turn is pretty underwhelming, but overall, I think it's a very solid wooden coaster. Let's go to launch coasters now, and Full Throttle. This is a really good ride from Premier Rides. It's not necessarily the longest, but the elements it packs in all have a punch. And I like some of the terrain usage as well, and the fact that it only has lap bars. I was able to get a good amount of room on each ride, which made the whole experience better, and there's no comfort collars. Okay, but for the layout itself, the launch at the beginning is pretty decent, but the hang time on that vertical loop is absolutely amazing. I've never actually felt the blood rush to my head a bit on a roller coaster until experiencing that vertical loop, and it just goes to show how long you're upside down. It's awesome, and then the dive loop later in the ride is great too, forwards and backwards. If you sit in the back, the ride ends with a bang with that awesome drop over the vertical loop. It is braked halfway through, but it's still a great ejector pop. Somewhat controversially, I thought this was slightly better than the other Premier Rides launch coaster, West Coast Racers, though this one does have a really neat dueling feature. There are some great moments of airtime and hang time, especially at the beginning of the White Sides track. But overall, I think Full Throttle is a better thrill ride, but West Coast Racers is a great family thrill ride. And again, that dueling feature, done right every single cycle, definitely helps. They fixed Twisted Colossus's problem with a pit stop midway through, so you can duel every time. It's not forceless though. Along with the negatives, there's also some positive G's in that Spaghetti Bowl section, especially on the yellow side. The final launch coaster is the biggest, Superman Escape from Krypton. This coaster has two identical tracks, and even though it just has a length of 1,235 feet, it has a height of 415 feet and a speed of 100 miles an hour. Unfortunately, this was the one major thrill coaster I did not get to experience. This was mainly due to the ride having technical difficulties, and when we did have a chance to ride it, it had too long of a line with our time restraints, so we never got on it. But it looks like a fun coaster, that's for sure. One thing I did notice though from off-ride is that this is one of the loudest coasters ever built. I really think you can hear this thing from the entire park, and Magic Mountain is a big park. That's how loud this is. For multi-loopers, we'll start with the most unique, and that is of course the B&M flying coaster on the top of the hill, Tatsu. I wish I'd gotten more than one ride on it, but what it did have was really impressive. If you're scared of heights, this is not the ride for you. But if you can tolerate them, it really does feel like you're flying. It's mostly graceful outside of the pretzel loop, but that was actually my favorite part on the ride. It's kind of odd being put on your back like that on a roller coaster, but I thought it was the ride's best moment. Overall, it's very smooth, and again, if you're not scared of heights, I think you'll enjoy it. Another inversions-based coaster is Batman the Ride. This is not anything as original as Tatsu. It is the classic B&M Batman clone, but it's really good. It's not too tall or not too fast, but you rip through those 5 inversions, and I thought the layout was really well put together by B&M. As far as clone coasters go, this is a good one. And there's really nothing inherently wrong with it. An overall very solid ride. Another pretty solid looper is the B&M floorless coaster, Scream. This was another one that was better than I was expecting it to be, but it's not a standout coaster or anything. For what it is, it's fine. 7 inversions, including a good 0G roll, just like Batman. This isn't anything too crazy, but it's fun for a ride or two. The weirdest thing about it was some of the technical issues it was having. On 3 separate occasions, I saw it stopped on the block zone. It was very odd. Besides that though, a decent enough ride. Moving on now, we have Riddler's Revenge, a coaster that objectively should be better than Scream, but because of the seating arrangement, or I guess standing arrangement, I think it's worse. The layout looks pretty solid on paper, but I just don't really love standing up on a roller coaster, and I banged my head a pretty good bit on it. Perhaps there's some sort of secret as to how to ride a stand-up coaster better that I wasn't aware of, but it wasn't the most comfortable experience for me. If you can tolerate the standing though, I think you'll really enjoy it. Viper is probably the most controversial coaster at the entire park. For me, I thought everything before the mid-course brake run was fine, and then after it got a little janky and uncomfortable. The second half of that ride in particular has some of those famous awkward transitions from aerodynamics, and the transitions in and out of those inversions weren't always the most pleasant. I think Viper is middle of the row and maybe even below average, but I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be. Not that great of a ride though. Moving on now to the family coasters, the most thrilling of the family coasters is Ninja. This almost walks the line of a family thrill coaster, and I think it has its pros and cons. The lift tilt to end the ride is anticlimactic, yes, but speaking of the layout itself, it uses the terrain pretty well, but the swinging wasn't nearly as emphasized as I thought and hoped it could be, and I didn't really feel it as much as I thought I might. It's fine and a cool experience for kids, but I must say I did enjoy the new Revolution a lot more. This is a very good family coaster. This ride originally opened in 1976, with some nice sweeping drops through the trees at the beginning, but it all leads up to that vertical loop, the world's first in modern history. It's got just enough force to live up to the hype, and then the rest of the ride is a really nice terrain-based layout. Not the craziest, but it's got lap bars, it's smooth, it's a classic, and it uses the terrain. What else could you want? Speaking of using the terrain and being a classic, how about Gold Rusher? Stepping down the thrill level a bit more, this is another really nice classic family coaster. It's an aerodynamics mine train, so it does have a few weird transitions and janks throughout it, but it's enjoyable. The highlight of the ride is definitely that final helix where you pick up some decent speed. Before that, it's a pretty tame ride, but at least you get a little bit of force here at the end. Going even smaller, there are 4 coasters I would qualify as kids coasters, starting with Roadrunner Express. This is a Vekoma Jr. coaster and a pretty respectable kids coaster. There's some on-ride theming elements, and it seems like most of the time you get 2 laps, which is always a nice touch. Of the 4 kids coasters, this was the only one I rode, but to be honest, the E&F Miler creation Canyon Blaster may be a little bit more wild. I'm not sure how comfortable those hills at the end are, but at least it gives the ride some character. Speedy Gonzales Hot Rod Racers really has no character, because it's a clone. It's a Zamperla family gravity coaster. I've ridden these before, and from my experience, they aren't particularly good, but hey, I love that this park has so many coasters for kids. The smallest one of the bunch though is Magic Flyer. This ride is adorable, but if you're over 54 inches, you can't ride it, you're too tall. Really cute ride though, and the first coaster in the lives of many. These coasters are all located in the Bugs Bunny World section of the park. This is a serviceable kids area with many other kid-friendly attractions mixed in with the 4 roller coasters. For non-coasters, Magic Mountain doesn't do nearly as well as you might think, but they do have 2 standoutish flat rides. Let's start with Crazanity. This pendulum is relatively tame for 2/3, but that 1/3 of max swings is quite thrilling. You get some awesome hang time mixed with air time, and then on the down swings, you get some wonderful speed. I overall enjoyed it, but I tend to prioritize coasters over flat rides. That being said, one flat ride I do think worth checking out is Lex Luthor Drop of Doom. This is attached to the Superman Escape from Krypton Tower, and it is a towering drop tower. That was a lot of towers. You're lifted pretty swiftly, only to be held up there for 10 to 15 seconds before you drop, and it feels like you drop forever. It's a great plunge. And for intensity lovers, there's some pretty good force at the bottom of that tower too. So you got the positives, you got the views, and you got the drop. It's a fun flat ride. Almost done with the ride lineup now. They have one dark ride, and it's a pretty good one in Justice League Battle for Metropolis. The first 3/4 of this ride is really good. The last 1/4 is too screen reliant, but overall it's still a very good ride for a Six Flags park. I think my favorite part about this interactive shooting dark ride from Sally has got to be that Joker animatronic that shoots at you towards the beginning. That's a great moment, and I wish there was more of it, especially towards the end. For water rides, you have a couple of options. I think Jetstream is probably the best one. This is an opening day attraction, and it looks like a great terrain-based log flume with a nice final plunge down the hill. They also have rip-roaring rapids if you want to get more wet. For transportation and observation rides, they used to have a lot more in these departments, but now are pretty much reduced to Magic Mover, which seems to be open on and off. I'm not exactly sure the situation there. And finally, there are a few upcharge attractions here and a slingshot and some go-karts. So overall, Magic Mountain has a good ride lineup, with the coasters definitely being the highlight. Operations at this park are admittedly a mixed bag. Some crews are consistently very good. Chris and the West Coast Racers crew in particular were fantastic. The Twisted Colossus crew was pretty good, and there were some others that were doing a good job too. But there were some other rides and crews that to be frank, really weren't dispatching rides in speeds of a timely manner. If everything was on 2 trains, that would be a different story, but unfortunately, this park seems to run 1 train on some of the major coasters more often than they should, and that's a problem that can easily be fixed. The park's appearance is usually pretty nice. There are some patches of minimal theming. The Screenpunk district is my personal favorite section, very light steampunk theming in here. That's the good end, but there are definitely some areas like Samurai Summit that haven't been touched in years and definitely need some refreshes. And generally speaking, there are some fresh coats of paint that could be used around the park. One final major criticism from me is the food offerings. This is a big park, and as I'm about to touch on, I think you need more than 1 day. But if you're really trying to eat healthy at all, it's really difficult at this park. It's typical theme park food, I know, but as someone who's trying to be on a pretty strict diet, it was tough to eat here, and I had to cheat because there just aren't enough good options. That being said, this is one of the Six Flags parks famous for their funnel cakes, and this gets a ridiculous line after park closing, so I imagine hitting it in mid-afternoon is your best bet. On the plus side, I was pleasantly surprised by this park's choice of merchandise. There was a good amount of ride-specific merchandise here, which is a nice change in comparison to some other theme park operators, like say Disney. So, do I ultimately recommend visiting? Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of really good coasters here, some good non-coasters, and the park looks nice enough overall. I think it's the best amusement park in California by far. To go back to what I was saying earlier, I think 2 days is the best bet here because there are just so many coasters, and even if you did all the ones you wanted to do in 1 day, which is unlikely in and of itself, there's many you'd want to do re-rides on. There aren't too many better Six Flags parks, and coaster-wise, there probably isn't one. So there you have it, my thoughts on Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. Let me know your thoughts on this park down in the comment section below if you've visited or want to. And please, if you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to the channel. I know this one went a little bit longer than some of the other stuff, but I wanted to give this park a proper in-depth look. So there you have it, that's my Six Flags Magic Mountain review. Thank you all for watching again, and I'll see you next time.